Greetings and welcome back. You're tuned into Tigrai Media House Daily English News. The headlines for today. International community is said to be the principal target of fictitious narratives of Abiy Ahmed's government regarding humanitarian aid. The UN chief calls for public services restoration within the Tigray region. And today, the United States government, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee specifically, passed the bill S-3199, officially now known as the Ethiopia Peace and Stabilization Act of 2022. The United States government, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, passed the bill S-3199, officially now known as Ethiopia Peace and Stabilization Act of 2022. This bill, originally sponsored in November of last year by the U.S. Senator Bob Menendez, who's also the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, joined by Senate Foreign Relations Committee Ranking Member Jim Risch and State and Foreign Operations Appropriation Committee Chairman Chris Coons. Today, they all gathered in this morning's business meeting following the committee's bipartisan approval of S-3199, also known as the Ethiopia Peace and Stabilization Act of 2022. Introduced in November of last year, the bipartisan legislation builds up the Biden administration's executive order creating a framework for sanctions in Ethiopia by bolstering the United States diplomatic development and legal responses to the support democracy, human rights, peace, and stability within the whole of Ethiopia. In addition to suspending American security assistance to the government of Ethiopia and authorizing American support for conflict resolutions, civil society peace-building efforts, the bill also mandates the imposition of targeted sanctions against individual actors linked to undermining attempts to resolve the civil conflict in Ethiopia who profit from it or who materially and directly contribute to the escalation of this ongoing civil war. In a statement released through the Foreign Relations Committee, Chairman Menendez said, "I am immensely proud that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has overwhelmingly supported this crucial bipartisan legislation to promote peace, democracy, and unity within the entirety of Ethiopia." Adding, "Today we not only shine a light on the extrajudicial killings, the mass sexual and gender-based violence, forced displacement, and even civilian humanitarian aid blockades as being used as weapon of this war, but we also take a big step to end these atrocities by setting up a policy framework that calls for determination by Secretary of State related to war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, a critical element in holding the perpetrators accountable." Ranking Member Jim Risch said this bill provides the tools to hold all parties to this conflict accountable for the many atrocities committed and a deadly humanitarian crisis. He continues to say the unilateral humanitarian ceasefire announced by the government of Ethiopia late last week is a welcome signal. However, humanitarian access remains at a stalemate and not all parties to the conflict have signed on to the ceasefire or even agreed to come to the negotiation table, and the road to national reconciliation for Ethiopia is just seeming too long. This legislation sends a strong message that the Congress is still serious about the accountability and resolving the conflict at hand. Foreign Operations Appropriations Subcommittee Chairman Chris Coons said, "While I've been encouraged in recent days by positive developments around commitments to a ceasefire or an improved humanitarian access, action rather than words by parties to the conflict is necessary to achieve a sustainable and lasting peace within Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Peace and Stabilization Act of 2022 is an important tool in this effort." He goes to say, "I joined my colleagues in a bipartisan vote in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to advance this bill to support the Biden administration's efforts to end this brutal conflict." Samuel Gabru, on his official Twitter account, reminds the public, although we've taken great strides forward, the fight has just begun, saying today's foreign markup session is another step in the process. Now, S-3199 and HR 6600 are out of their respective committees. The legislative process goes to the House, and the Senate should continue. Tigray government says the international community is the principal target of fictitious narratives of Abiy Ahmed's government regarding delivery of humanitarian aid. In a further update released yesterday through its External Affairs Office, the government of Tigray said it has been observing a temporary cessation of hostilities since the 24th of March 2022 in order to facilitate the provision of much-needed humanitarian assistance to the people of Tigray without any delay. It added, however, that no humanitarian aid has so far arrived in the Tigray region, and according to the update, Ethiopian authorities continue to saturate the airwaves with the false claims that humanitarian aid was flowing into Tigray on a daily basis. The government of Tigray stressed that all relevant stakeholders should note that such fictitious narratives are designed to befuddle people in the outside of the country, but the principal target is specifically the international community. The government of Tigray said the delivery of humanitarian aid without any obstruction must be decoupled for political issues. It also demanded the provision of sufficient humanitarian assistance without any delay and an end to mendacious claims regarding the delivery of humanitarian aid into the Tigray region. The government of Tigray also called on the international community to demand an end to word games and, in accordance with the understanding reached, bring sufficient pressure to bear on the regime to allow unfettered humanitarian access into the Tigray region. The government of Tigray reassured the international community that it remains committed to doing everything in its power to implement the agreement on the cessation of all hostilities. Although the truce has been labeled as a humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government, no aid has started to flow into Tigray days after the announcement of the so-called humanitarian truce by the Ethiopian government. VOA asked Kindeya Gabrahiwet of Tigray External Affairs Office as to why aid has not reached Tigray so far, and here's what he had to say. Our responsibility is, once aid trucks reach areas controlled by our army, to safeguard and escort them to reach areas where the people who need the assistance are found. Everything before that is the responsibility of the other side. So, we don't know the reason. We had issued a statement yesterday and another one before that to inform our people. We are seeing signs that those who announced the humanitarian truce to facilitate free flow of humanitarian aid are not living up to their word. It is to be recalled that almost 2 weeks ago, the Ethiopian government had announced that 23 trucks of food aid and fuel had departed for Tigray, and later accused Tigray forces of obstructing the transportation of aid by land. Kindeya Gabrahiwet said such a claim, in a situation where no aid trucks have reached areas controlled by the Tigrayan army, is aimed just at hoodwinking the international community. The agreement is not confined to just two sides. Different organizations, especially those involved in the humanitarian intervention, are also a part of the agreement as mediators. So, we will see what the international community will do after this. Otherwise, we hope the Ethiopian government will keep its end of the bargain. Tigray needs at least 700 truckloads of supplies a week currently. The government of Tigray has reiterated that it remains committed to playing a constructive role in helping aid get to the millions of Tigrayans, as well as the people in desperate need of humanitarian assistance in all the neighboring regions as well. The UN chief, Antonio Guterres, calls for public service restoration in the Tigray region. The Secretary General welcomed the humanitarian truce declared by the federal and Tigray regional governments. He also called for the restoration of public services in Tigray, including banking, electricity, and telecommunication. Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on all sides to proactively enable and facilitate the delivery of desperately needed humanitarian assistance across all of the affected areas. Guterres urged all the parties to build on this development and take the necessary steps towards a long-term ceasefire. Although the truce has been enabled by the government of Ethiopia, lack of details and conflicting statements shroud Ethiopia's latest truce in mystery. Al Jazeera reports that with no one holding Ethiopia accountable for its failure to honor previous agreement with the UN to facilitate aid flow, it has become difficult to believe that the latest truce is in fact enforceable. Timnit Bairu presents the story by Al Jazeera.
Lack of details and conflicting statements shroud Ethiopia's latest truce in mystery. Al Jazeera reports that with no one holding Ethiopian accountable for its failure to honor a previous agreement with the UN to facilitate aid flow, it has become difficult to believe that the latest truce is enforceable. Neither the TPLF or the Ethiopian government has disclosed details of the cessation of hostilities. Nothing is known as to when aid will arrive or even how aid convoys carrying urgent aid will navigate the heavily militarized roads to Tigray. There has also been no word on whether Ethiopia is contemplating restoring Tigray's banking and communication services severed since July. Tigray government representative Fisaha Tasamma told Al Jazeera that his government is ready to observe the cessation of hostilities for humanitarian operations and for public services to be restored. He added, however, that there have been no developments on the ground so far. Fisaha explained that the truce was not the result of any agreement, and despite ongoing peace talks, the announcement had caught the TPLF off guard. Belene Siyum, spokesperson for Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, did not respond to an email requesting clarity on the matter. Aid convoys en route to Tigray have previously been attacked. Ethiopian security forces arrested 72 trucks drivers working for the World Food Programme last November, further curtailing distribution. Without secure supply lines for aid workers, the truce quickly unraveled. Adala Lamma, founder of the influential Addis Standard news magazine, says that under international law, humanitarian assistance can't be held hostage to political or military negotiations. All parties have an obligation under international humanitarian law to provide unimpeded access to those in need, she underlined. Adala noted that there is no explanation for why the government isn't lifting the blockade on telecom, electricity, and banking services. She said these would alleviate a great deal of the suffering, especially for the working class who can't access their own savings to buy whatever is available in the local market. The opacity of the agreement and the lack of an implementation mechanism renders it difficult to ascertain if concrete action is set to follow. Al Jazeera also recalled the government's previous unkept promises. Less than a month into the war, and when famine was a barely brewing threat, news of the Ethiopian government signing a deal with the UN securing unimpeded humanitarian access into Tigray made headlines. That access was never granted. Instead, UN workers were denied access for months into 2 UNHCR-run refugee camps, which hosted more than 25,000 Eritrean refugees prior to the war. The camps were systematically razed into the ground between December 2020 and January 2021. By May 2021, UN staff were finally granted access to the ruins of the camps. Aid workers operating in areas under Ethiopian control were also regularly harassed and arrested and murdered. According to UN data, 23 aid workers had been killed across Tigray by July 2021. A New York Times investigation revealed that the Ethiopian troops summarily executed 3 Doctors Without Borders staffers, Tigrayans Yohannes Halafom, 32, Tedros Gabramariam, 31, and Spanish national Maria Hernandez, 35, on June 24, 2021. Al Jazeera said, with no one holding Ethiopia accountable for its failure to honor an agreement with the UN to facilitate aid flow in 2020, it has become difficult to believe that the latest truce is enforceable. Goitoum Gabralul, a researcher and political analyst on the Horn of Africa, told Al Jazeera that Abiy Ahmed is not to be trusted, as he has continuously lied on humanitarian aid and the presence of Eritrean soldiers, among other things. A truce, as with any other peace deal, should be formalized and transparent, with mediators providing some guarantees. With such a framework absent, one shouldn't be hopeful. Al Jazeera noted that all of this has left a lot open to speculation and continues to further shroud the truce in mystery.
Ida Referral Hospital in Ma'ala, capital of Ethiopia's Tigray region, is teeming with patients, with many lying on the hallway floor of that same hospital. According to International Red Cross Society, the influx of patients is double the capacity of what the hospital can hold. Fatima Sator of the International and Cross Society says the assistance, the need in the hospital is just extremely incomparable. Let's take a listen.
We are here in Eider Hospital in the north of Ethiopia in the region of Tigray. We've been visiting the hospital where emergency rooms are full, almost double of their capacity. For 600 beds, there are 1,000 patients. People are sitting in the corridor waiting for treatment. At the same time, chronic diseases department like It can be oncology, department for diabetes patients, hypertension, HIV, are almost empty because of the lack of medicine. So doctors have been asking their patient either to go back home or to get medicine from the outside to be able to be treated. The ICRC has been supporting the health facilities in the Tigray region through air by bringing medicine to this hospital, including insulin. However, the assistance compared to the need remains very insufficient.
As we wait for this truce to be in fact implemented, a recent study by professors at Belgium's Ghent University of the 500,000 deaths since the start of the war in Tigray, more than 100,000 deaths are due to the lack of health care alone. The Oromo Federalist Congress calls for an all-around ceasefire and peace talks between the Oromo Liberation Army, also known as OLA, and the federal government. The government must enter into negotiations with the forces that are currently engaged in civil war to end the conflict, remove all legal obstacles, prevent their participation, and must be invited to participate in dialogue, as the OFC said in a statement that they released. OFC stated that all political prisoners, specifically the leaders of the Oromo Liberation Front and the OFC who are currently languishing in the prisons, must be released immediately. The civic society organizations have also called for the immediate intervention to protect the Patriarch of Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church. The organization strongly condemned the threats made against His Holiness Abuna Matthias, the first Patriarch of the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, by the Ethiopian government and the pro-government media in general. According to their statement, the Patriarch has been living under duress for the past 18 months for speaking up against the genocidal war on Tigray and the atrocities that ensued and continue to ensue at the hands of the Ethiopian and the Eritrean armies, as well as the Amhara regional state security forces and militia. The organizations called on the international community and the leaders of various religions around the world to intervene quickly. The Patriarch's condemnation of the gruesome killings of Tigrayans who were burned alive in the Benishangul Gumuz region of Ethiopia by the Ethiopian and Amhara regional state security forces was received with a great deal of hostility from the Ethiopian government and its officials, who took the media to publicly criticize and even go as far as threatening him. As we move on to our final update for today, Addis Ababa ranked first among the 15 African cities, with the highest cost of living index scores. A report by Business Insider Africa read that the Ethiopian capital city has the highest currently cost of living index score in Africa at a staggering 58.92. According to the report, the prices of the consumer goods are quite high in this Horn of Africa city compared to other cities across the entire continent. Abidjan and Harar were ranked second and third in the cost of living index in their scores in respectively fields. That wraps up our news for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a wonderful night. Bye-bye.